What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Invest Iowa. Today, I have Amr with me, and we're going to talk about development, construction, luxury construction, and a bunch of businesses and how to connect them all together with real estate. Thank you so much for coming, man.
It's a pleasure to be on your podcast, man. How's it going?
Appreciate it. Good. So let's get started with the Egyptian part. So you're Egyptian descendant.
Yeah, I'm actually still Egyptian. I only moved to the US, say, some 8 years ago or so. But that's actually where I got my head start in my real estate career. So it's been a very formative part of my career, being an Egyptian national and having the opportunity to be able to invest in a market that was much cheaper than the US market.
Okay, so you started investing in the Egyptian market. What was that like? You started as an investor or as a real estate agent? How does that work?
So I started I started building with my dad, actually. So at around age 16, I think was the first time that I did a development with my dad. Obviously, I wasn't paid or anything. I was shadowing him. And he was building our family home at the time. And he was building it himself because he comes from a construction background. So he's a civil engineer and a real estate developer himself. And he was building our family home. And that was the first time that I really got my hands dirty in real estate and in construction. So believe it or not, I was just a construction worker. So I was just like there pouring concrete, like getting messy and just doing what needed to be done. And that was the very first job that I actually had in real estate, albeit almost like an internship. Like, I think it really paid per se. But that was the first time where I was, diligently doing it and with responsibilities that I had to deliver on. And then over the years, we kept doing that. So he kept building another building every year between the ages of, for me, 16 to, I want to say, 23. And during that time, I was working for him in a variety of different capacities. So in the beginning, I obviously was just like a construction worker. And then I got promoted and so on and so forth, till by the time I was 23, I was partnering with him on the deals themselves. So I was finding the deal and deploying the capital, managing the teams. And that was by age 23. I think I did maybe 6 projects prior to moving to the US. And they were a variety of different projects. They were mostly multifamily, except for 2 homes that were single family residences. So that was kind of on the execution side of things. But on the theoretical side of things, I was also studying to be an architect during that time frame. So 16 to 22 or so, I was studying architecture, and meanwhile, I was applying whatever I was learning into a practical case scenario. So that was an extremely formative time for me, because I got both the theoretical end of things, and I saw how it would impact the physical elements of what we're actually trying to build, and how that either created revenue or lost us revenue, right? So not everything that is an add-on is necessarily a value add. And that was something that I learned through that experience, and having both sides of the equation. I think that gets lost a little bit with a lot of the people that do it in theory, but don't actually get their hands dirty in practice. But that was something that I was lucky enough to be able to experience. And that was my first foray in real estate. My last real estate opportunities in Egypt were really when I was around 23. So that was maybe 12 years ago or so. And then I moved to the US. I started working for a family office. And at the same time, while I was in Egypt, I actually had another business that was related to real estate and construction. But it was basically a prefab manufacturing facility that did pretty well. But at the time, I wasn't a very savvy business person, and I didn't have the best contracts and agreements with my business partners. So it kind of went south. Even though the business itself did really well and it continues to do really well, I unfortunately didn't make the best decisions. And because of that, it kind of put me in a precarious situation. So when I left that business and kind of got out of it, and I moved to the US, I was extremely interested in understanding the capital raise side of the equation, and what the business side of the equation was, because I, at the time, thought I had the expertise of delivering, right? So the operational end of things, I completely understood. The design end of things, I completely understood. The construction end of things, I understood. But the things that I felt were lacking were the things that caused me a little bit of a loss, right, in that previous business, by not having an understanding of how to raise capital, and also not having an understanding of like best business practices. So I really wanted to focus on business. And for the next 4 years of my life, I worked for a family office on the business side of things and finance. So my roles and responsibilities started off as like, again, an internship. And by the end of 4 years, I was managing about a 300-person team that that commercialized an FDA approved product that we had bought from a Korean company under this family office in the West Coast. So my territory was, kind of draw a line with the state of Texas, everything to the left of the nation was kind of my territory. And I was part of a team, a 4-person team. We were called the Whiz Kids. And we would basically buy these products from overseas companies and commercialize them within the US, and then sell them to other companies. And that was something that I really felt that I was yearning for. It was something that I felt was my weakness. And that's what I went after to kind of understand and solidify. And I was lucky enough to have the opportunity again. And it seemed that luck continues to be on my side in every step of the way. But, you know, I went through that experience, and it was honestly pivotal for me, because I understood business practices a lot better. I understood what contracts meant and how they could really impact one's outcome in a business, besides whether the business is doing well or not, right? And the last but not least was, what are people looking for when you want to raise capital from them? Which was a complete mystery to me. To me, if I didn't have the capital myself, or had to lean on someone that personally knew me, then how do you raise capital from a stranger? And what are the regulatory hurdles around that? What do you structure? Who do you need involved in a team? All those things. So I got that experience. And once I was finished with that, and we had our natural exit for that business, I quit, because I realized that I had kind of capped out within that business. I either had to make partner to move to the next step up, which wasn't going to happen because it was a family office. So it's just the 3 brothers, right? They're not going to make a random person a partner to them.
Right.
And it was also a large organization. So if they hadn't done it with any of the other senior executives, why would they do it for me, right? So I respectfully left, and we're still on great terms. And they were actually some of my first investors in my ventures in California when I moved here. So when I moved to California, the premise was, now I understand real estate, and I understand how to execute on real estate. And now I understand the business side of things, because I worked on Wall Street, well, not Wall Street, but 59th and Park, in the heart of finance world, raising capital, buying companies, commercializing companies, and selling companies, right? It's a lot. I kind of wanted to combine those 2 things. So I was like, well, what if I could use the skill set that I'd acquired most recently, raising capital, managing teams, building businesses, and selling them in real estate, the thing that I actually have a passion for, and the thing that I understood really well. While I was really good at the capital raise and like the commercializing aspect and the businesses and why we would buy them, I did not understand the intricacies of the products that we were buying. That was the partners' jobs, right? So they would decide that, we need to buy the lumbar disc device from Korea. And then they tell me and the 3 other guys that worked with me to do a bunch of analyses to figure out whether it's worth it or not. But it wasn't me that thought, okay, I think people have a lot of issues with lumbar discs, so we should come up with something that would resolve the lumbar disc issue, right? And because of that, I was like, well, where could I apply this skill set and be able to create the maximum leverage? And the one area of expertise to me was obviously real estate. and I could apply an exponential growth factor by being able to deliver real estate that functioned at a high level, that would allow its investors and the community that live within it to flourish and have a higher return fundamentally. So because of that, I kind of took that skill set and combined it with real estate, and we started our family office, Samaha Holdings. And Samaha Holdings basically invests in real estate and has all the umbrella companies that I kind of spoke to you about. And at the forefront of those is Moon Equities, which Samaha Holdings owns majority of. Moon Equities is the only entity where we allow outside investors to invest with us side by side. And the workflow kind of goes as follows. Samaha Holdings figures out where the opportunities in the market are, right? So that's basically me and my brother and our small team of 15 individuals that are constantly looking at the real estate market and analyzing where inefficiencies are and deciding where the next puck is going to move to. And we're jumping on that, right? It's quite a high risk value proposition compared to, for example, a fix and flip, because a fix and flip is just comparing this house to the house next to it, right?
Yeah.
But if I were to say, I believe that data centers are going to move into Ohio, and I believe they're going to move into this pocket. And based on that, we're expecting a certain amount of revenue to move into this area. And because of that, there is a higher growth in that area. And I think they're going to need housing within this market, right? So we're going to buy a large plot of land of 40 acres and we're going to subdivide it. And then we're going to bring on investors to fund that deal, right? We don't allow investors to go into high risk propositions similar to this one prior to us vetting. So the entity that takes on the risk is my holding company. And if we do great, then we offer it to our investors and we allow them to invest side by side with us, because what's more important to us is our reputation more so than the money, right?
Right.
So we take on the risk on the onset ourselves. We make sure that the deal pencils out and it makes sense. But once it does, then we commercialize it by handing it over to our private equity firm, Moon Equities. And then we obviously pitch it to our investors and commercialize it and sell it and so on. And that's kind of the high level overview. I obviously own my own design practice that also works in conjunction with other real estate entities to provide this experience and expertise in delivering the product. So that is, on the construction side, on the design side, and also on the urban planning side. So when we're looking at real estate from a very high level and thinking about like creating micro communities, how do those micro communities work together so that they, again, give the highest return on investment and function in the best way possible for their end users? And that's just kind of the overall structure of where I started and where I am today.
I love it. That was so detailed, like so descriptive.
Well, it's in my mind. This is all, the history of my life. So
Yeah. I think
I
most
remember it very clearly.
I think most people would just skip a lot of things that you're missing. I feel like you're very methodical into what you're working on right now. Talk to me about those systems that you have to learn to not get screwed over.
Oh man. So I think it depends on everyone's journey and where they are, right? But for me at the time, I was being trained to be an operator, right? So everything that I've done to that moment in time was either doing something with my hands, right? Building homes myself, or managing people building homes, or then learning the big picture of how to be able to create communities as an architect and why some communities fail versus others that become extremely successful, and the socioeconomic impact of those different design elements. And I know a lot of people, this will kind of gloss over them, but those were the skills that I was being taught, right? I was being taught to be an employee, fundamentally, right? I wasn't being taught to be a business owner. But to your point earlier, prior to the podcast, when you're saying you had no interest being someone's employee, you wanted to create your own business. I did as well, because I grew up around a lot of individuals that had extremely successful family members but none of those family members were employees then, right? They owned their own businesses, whether it was a small business or a behemoth of a business, they still owned their own business. And that really resonated with me because I realized that, I could do that. It wasn't that they were smarter. It wasn't that they had, an exponential amount of resources. It was only a life decision, and it
Mm,
came with its own stressors.
yeah.
So in that moment in time, I realized that if I continued down this path, and I started at first working for an architecture practice, I realized how slow my trajectory to get to the life that I want to live was. And I decided that I can't do that and I need to start my own business. I jumped straight into doing a business, and it fundamentally, the business itself was successful, but I wasn't successful because I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And what I didn't know at the time is the power of a contract, right? Even if you start a business with your best buddy, right, and you don't have things documented, then problems do arise. And if not agreed upon in the most meticulous manner, then resolutions are not easily resolved. Issues are not easily resolved.
Mm.
And that was my first experience in sort of contract law, if I were to kind of like phrase it more appropriately. So that was one thing that I really had to take a hard lesson on, negotiating and contracts, right? And understanding the power of those things. But it wasn't only that, it was that and diplomacy, right? Because we could have the same conversation about the exact same topic, but the way in which you present it, and the way in which you sell yourself, even to your spouse or to your business partner or to you on this podcast and the audience, it really makes a difference. You could be eloquent like Barack Obama and sell people, snake oil, or you could be a little rough around the edges and try to do a good job, and people will hate you like Donald Trump, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they're both patriotic people and they both love America and they're both trying to do the best for their people. But it's just, how do you communicate that message? Which was something that I had to learn the hard way again, because I was, again, very cut and dry, like, hey, man, this is what it is, right? But the truth of the matter is, it's not just as simple as that, right? There's a lot of emotional intelligence that goes into it. And that was the second thing that I had to understand is, how do you sell, right? How do you
Yeah.
sell to people so that they're enjoying the journey and that they also see the benefit that they're getting, right? Without being a hard liner on things. Sometimes you have to be, but that doesn't change that. That should be the last resort that you get to. So that was a third thing, right?
Yeah.
And the fourth thing that I had to grapple with, and I honestly still kind of grapple with right now, is growing large teams. Managing teams in excess of 40 individuals is extremely hard, or at least it's extremely hard for me, right?
Why?
So what ends up happening beyond 40 individuals at a small company scale is everyone's expecting you to be their leader, right? They want your attention. They work for you. They don't work for the company. They work for the figurehead of the company.
Okay.
So my employees want my time. And if I can't give them my time, and if I can't be coaching them personally on what they need to be doing next, they feel that their emotional paycheck has been taken away from them, right? And that poses a different sort of issue, right? So if you want to be able to create bigger teams, then you need to bring on other leaders, right? And if you want to bring on other leaders, they're highly competitive and they're highly paid, and they also want skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
So you want to be able to strike that balance of not giving away too much to your leadership, to a point that it actually disincentivizes them. So hypothetically speaking, if you bring on someone and you give them 50% of your business day one, right, then they're just kind of relaxed. But if you give them something that they could work towards by giving them, say, 2, 3, 4% of your business, right, then that business needs to grow to fulfill their appetite, right?
Yeah.
So if you're at 10 million and they get 2, 3% of the 10 million, that's good money.
Yeah.
But when you're bringing on leadership, they themselves want to be making 10 million. So for them to get to that 10 million, they need to make their 2, 3, 4, 5% equate to 10 million, right?
Yeah.
Which means that they're going to push the entire organization up. But that's also not easy, because you, again, need to go back to this point where you're drafting these contracts, creating these negotiations, and selling them on this vision. Because you could bring them in and, you know, they won't be sold because you're not providing a good value proposition, or they don't see that you're going to be able to achieve that goal, or they themselves are not the right fit. They might be too greedy and they want it now, they want it today, and they're not the right partner. But for those reasons, that's sort of the stage that our companies have been at. We almost always get to like around 40, 45 individuals, and then we lay off some people, and then we add some more people, and then we lay off some people. But we haven't really been able to break out that 40 individual breakpoint. So
That's your current challenge?
Yeah, that's internally, that's my current challenge. So my current internal challenge isn't raising capital. That's easy. It's not finding the projects. That's also relatively easy. It's how do you have enough infrastructure to be able to take on more projects and be able to manage more capital, right? Because if you have people that are giving you, we raise about $2 million a week now. And we actually had to stop taking in capital over the last 3 weeks because we just don't have the capacity to be able to take people's money and deploy it with the returns that we're expecting or that we've been delivering to individuals. And that's fundamentally because we need to have a more elaborate infrastructure to take on that capital, right? So what we're focusing on right now is adding far more complicated systems. I say it's complicated, but it's not really that complex, just more elaborate systems on the project management and execution side of the business. And that's taking a little bit of a hurdle, I'd say. It's taking time to be able to vet the right individuals and make sure that they're getting into filling the shoes that they're required to fill prior to taking on that capital to deploy and put anyone's money at risk. So we're extremely excited about this next growth phase. But hopefully in a year's time, we have this conversation and I tell you that we're at maybe 18 individuals, and that would be a big success metric for me.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying when it's a lot of little things that add up to a compound system. It's not like you can just hire someone to know the process, because technically even if you hire them, they're gonna require your time to learn the things that you're doing. Yeah.
And it's you know, from the day we hire someone to the day we kind of let them do their job, we give them about 90 days. So we don't see any sort of return on investment on hiring individuals for about 90 days.
Yeah. Because especially because your time is more valuable somewhere else, and now you have to deploy it on the person that just training.
Yeah, well, I personally don't train people. I do some trainings and I audit some people, but I personally don't train anyone unless they're working directly with me. Then I train them, but then their managers train them. But when I say 90 days before we kind of like let them go off on their own, we're not expecting from them to execute at their full potential for 90 days. That doesn't mean that they're not doing their job. They're doing a job, but they're kind of gradually pacing in, as opposed to us expecting, you know, from day one, hey, you have 10 projects to deal with now, right? That'd be a little bit too much, especially that we're very design focused as a real estate development company, both on the Moon Equity side and Samaha Holdings and all of it. So it's a very thoughtful process, and it's a process that isn't formally taught to people, right? You're either an architect or in finance or in real estate, but the amalgamation of all the elements to create better communities and higher returns is something that is unique to really large firms similar to, you know, like the Witkoffs of the world, right? And obviously we're nowhere as big as Witkoff Group, but it's a similar model where we really take very undervalued areas and communities and infuse the life that they need into them, and that gives us the highest return on investment. And that's something that isn't inherently available anywhere. Like even if you read Bigger Pockets or watch all the podcasts. I personally don't talk about it, and I've never taught it to anyone other than the people in my community. So to that extent, I know Witkoff Group aren't either. You have to either have worked for me or any one of those other larger developers to understand how all those elements put together really create for an exponential growth outside of just the simple fix and flip and just move it along. So yeah, that's why we kind of need a little bit of training time for people before we set them off to do their job on their own.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, you're developing neighborhoods into through construction, through everything that you do to then increase the value of the area overall.
Yes. So to give you two examples, and we do it across the spectrum of real estate. I'll give you an entry-level example, and I'll give you a very high-end level example. So for the entry-level example, and this is free game, right?
A freebie.
Hypothetically speaking, you're investing in Ohio, right? And let's say this background here is Ohio. You could go and buy this building, right? And flip it and sell it, and you'll make whatever, 20, 30, 40% on it, right? Great flip, you made money on it. That's wonderful. An alternative to that is you could buy this building, flip it, hold it, buy that building, flip it, hold it, buy that building, flip it, hold it, buy this building, flip it, hold it, buy this building, flip it, hold it, buy this building, flip it, hold it, right? Within a certain time frame, if you could do all of those, and now you control a community, right? A pocket. Now that pocket collectively has a new valuation to what it was before, because just making this one building better is great, but it requires a lot of other people to take on risk to come and move into this community, right? Because this building's a little rough and it has, a bunch of homeless people around it, a bunch of, drug addicts, crime, whatever, right? But if you take a community that is struggling from something and you just solve the thing that it's struggling from, now it goes from being completely undervalued to being just at market value, right? Now that's just a regular flip. Now, if you take it from being undervalued to market value, and then you've made it even better than the market, then it demands a new premium, right?
Right.
So to give you an idea, and this is something that has happened a million times over. I'm not the creator of this. People see it, they just don't realize how it's done, right? If you think about Williamsburg, New York, right? Mm-hmm. Williamsburg is right across the river from Manhattan, right? It used to be, for the vast majority of the waterfront, just warehouses, disheveled looking, kind of like this. It was a very high crime rate area, and the real estate was extremely cheap, price per square foot compared to Manhattan, right? And it's right there. It's overlooking Manhattan. It's a mile and a half. That's it, right? But no one thought to buy there, right? But then Kushner Group did, the Witkoffs did, the Trump Enterprise did, and every other notable name, Thor Equities did, and every other notable name saw the opportunity and saw the problem, right? So they bought the real estate, they stabilized the real estate, they redeveloped the community, and now that community is some of the best areas in New York that you could live in, right? It's safer, it's better, it has better roads, it's newer, it has better views, because you're actually overlooking the skyline of Manhattan as opposed to looking at your neighbor's door, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing that could get repeated again and again. How we deploy it with Moon Equities is we buy into communities that are very distressed. So we're not trying to gentrify people, because there are actually no stakeholders in the community. A lot of the homes that we have are completely disheveled. Like no one lives in them. Not even a drug addict. Like no one is in that property. It's just completely disheveled. And we buy in places like Ohio and Tennessee and Georgia and Indiana. And fundamentally what we're capitalizing on is all the tax dollars that the government had paid to create the infrastructure for free for these cities, right? And today these homes are being sold way below
pennies on the dollar.
Way below market value, right? It would literally cost 2 to 3 times more to build these homes new in the desert or in the wilderness than it would to buy homes right in the heart of the city. But the reason that people don't do that is because they don't want to deal with all the pain and the dirty work of having to reinvigorate a community. That's a lot of hard work. I'm not saying it's easy, but you take that home that's at 60, where no one wants to live in it, or at 0, because a lot of times we are actually offered homes at 0. And we actually provide that same home still below the median average for the United States home value. So we're still selling those homes at entry-level products because genuinely we believe that in today's market, that's what the market needs. We need more entry-level homes, particularly in these markets. So we still provide those homes below the median. And we think that that's a much faster and safer value proposition for us and our investors than to go create a new subdivision in those exact same cities.
Question.
Go ahead.
Is this, so what you just said, that the market needs more entry level houses, which I completely agree with, is that one of those lessons that you learned when you were telling me that how do I sell this thing?
Yes, that is part of the lessons that I did learn. It's also understanding what market dynamics mean, right? Going into this year and the end of actually for the last 4 years, we've really slowed down our buying. We had a certain number of big projects that have like 5 to 10 year horizons. And we're like, you know what? The market's too hot. I want to sit and wait, see what happens, right? And we didn't completely stop buying. We did still buy, 2-3 properties a year that were like extremely ultra luxury homes, like, the houses that I was telling you about in the Hollywood Hills and in Beverly Hills and a few other pockets. But we paused on buying in bulk, right? Like the market's too hot. And then as soon as the market started to show signs of weakness, end of last year, we started to pick up our buying again. Right. So once the news starts talking about, oh, it's recession time, that's when we started actually buying. When everyone was like really scared and considering whether the market is healthy or not, we're like, you know what? This is exactly the opportunity for us to buy.
Brilliant.
Because anyone that is trying to sell now hears this and they're like, oh, I don't want to catch the recession, so I'd rather sell. Right.
Yeah.
So they're already more motivated to sell, right? I'm not saying it makes it easier. I'm not saying it makes it more abundant, because clearly through going through this entire process up to this year, it hasn't been that the market's been flooded with homes. But those that want to sell are willing to sell at a steeper discount today than they were 2-3 years ago, because they're not being fueled with this idea of there will be more, the market's hot, people are paying more, right? Now they're being fueled with this idea of a recession, right? And if we're going to buy anything in a recession, right, you want to buy something that people can't say no to, right?
Right.
You want to buy a product that, if you want to sell, is extremely liquid. I don't want to buy a product that is the most expensive home in Los Angeles. I don't want to buy the product that's the most expensive penthouse in New York. That's a good product, but it's just not the product that I personally want, or I want to position my investors in. What I want to position my investors in is something that's extremely liquid, because the homes that we're buying are a need. They're not a want, right? Everyone needs a home and everyone needs shelter. So if we could provide shelter that is safe, habitable, hopefully beautiful, and safe, like I just said earlier, then people will buy it. And if it's at the right price point, at the entry-level price point that the nation's in dire need of, then it's going to go very quickly. And that's been the case. Every home that we've sold has gone over ask, even during this recession, right? So to that extent, it's just understanding what market dynamics are and how are you providing value, right? How are you making the biggest impact, both for the community and for ourselves?
This is incredible. I have 2 questions. So first of all, what do you call this strategy? Is this because I guess this is only an opportunity for the people that actually have very good ways to raise capital, ways to analyze deals, ways to obtain deals. Like you need a lot of infrastructure and a lot of teams put together to do what you're doing, right? Because your average flipper is going to be really good with the construction side, but it's gonna have no idea how to negotiate a deal from a wholesaler, right? Like there's so many things that you're doing that are in one place, and I imagine that's why you're bringing so much value. Is first question is, what do you call this strategy?
So we have a name, an inside name
Yeah.
for the product, right? We have so the way we think about it in our business is we have a variety of different products that we allow our investors to get into in Moon Equities. And internally, the code name for this particular product I was talking to you about is Towns End. And it's kind of a play on words because typically when you create a new community, you create it at the end of the town. So it's at Town's End. But all the communities that we're redeveloping are actually right in the heart of the city in areas where people would otherwise not call Town's End because it's right in the middle of the city. So that's what we call it as a product under Moon Equities. But what this is just a redevelopment play, right? It's not even an adaptive reuse play because it's the same use. We're not changing the use of the real estate. It's just a redevelopment opportunity of undervalued neighborhoods.
I'd imagine I mean, besides the value add proposition, because I know a lot of multifamily investors, that's the only way that they find deals, right? They find those communities that are in distress, they put systems in place, and they make the entire building overall better.
Yep.
And that increases valuation crazy, right? You're doing the
Yep.
same, but for communities.
Exactly.
How many, I guess, give me an estimate of, I want to talk about the products, and we can go as detailed as you will like to, about the products, and also about what is that conversation in the developing process. How many properties are we talking about in order to, have the at home ends strategy?
Yeah,
Like how many properties would you have to acquire? Is it an entire block? Is it 2 blocks?
So we haven't ever been successful enough to buy the entire block. That's just extremely hard. There are a lot of people that don't want to sell. There are a lot of people that you can't even get a hold of. There are a variety of different reasons why you can't get every single property on the block. And also, when we're buying into a community, you can't really set the price. You kind of average the price out, right? Some people want to sell to you for free. Some people want to sell to you for 60,000. Some people want to sell to you for 80,000. Some people want to sell for 100,000. The name of the game is to try and buy as much as possible within an average that you set for the entire community. And then for those that don't want to sell, you want to provide them with a value add proposition as well, because it makes your real estate better, right? So let's hypothetically say I bought this house or this building. I can't buy this one because they don't want to sell. I don't want to buy that one, right? So I buy this one. This guy doesn't want to sell. I'll rehab this one. I'll rehab that one. And I'll tell this guy that I'll rehab the outside of his building. I'll fence it. I'll make it look nice. I'll paint it. I'll put in the right trees that match the rest of the street. I'll make it look like all of this is owned by the same development group, right? Even though this particular home, I'm making no money on, right? But in this home looking as good as all the other homes that I've been able to purchase, you get it. And it doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not looking at it at the micro scale. You're not looking, and this is the difference between doing a flip and thinking about things in a macro level, right? And it's just as simple as going from the micro to the macro. So as soon as you take a bigger lens and you look at the bigger picture and create a larger horizon. So if your flips, you want to get in and out of them in 3 months, right? You're going to say, okay, this is going to take me 18 months, right? And in those 18 months, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy X number of homes within an X pocket, and I'm going to be able to do these exact line items to appreciate the value of that community. And it's not really that hard because you could just go over to the next zip code over and be like, okay, well, why is this area nicer, right? You look at the trees, you look at the curb appeal, you look at how wide the street is, you look at how clean the side pavement is. And if you could replicate all those things in your less nice neighborhood, then you're an extremely comparable comp now, right?
Okay.
So that's how rough neighborhoods go from being rough to being nicer or mid-tier. And I'm not saying that you go from, a very rough neighborhood where no one would want to even walk, right, to making a luxury product. That is, one, unfair and unethical, and then two, it's also unsuccessful because it requires way more work than just making it uninhabitable to entry level, right? Or entry level to mid-tier,
Right.
or mid-tier to luxury, right? Or luxury, I don't know what you go from luxury, but like just newer luxury.
Right.
So that's just the kind of the overall mindset.
Yeah.
And obviously, you're a real estate wholesaler investor yourself, so you understand like all the marketing jargon of like cold calling, door knocking, mailers. Like you do all of it. You do all of it to try and get as much accumulation within the one pocket.
Well, this is actually the first time that I hear about this strategy. So I'm always learning something new. This is incredible.
I told you it was free game.
Now, you gave me the entry level example, right? We
Yeah.
could talk about the other example. What about the products? What type of products do you have for your investors, and how do you pitch that to them?
Yeah, so we have a variety of different products, and we work like a family office, so we don't have like an endless supply of investors, and we also actually don't want it because we don't have the capacity to take on more money than what we could deploy, and we don't care to take people's money unless we could deploy it, which is something that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. So we have a small group of investors, and that small group of investors all work together. We give them two value propositions, right? They can either come in to the deal with us, and we give them about half of the returns on the deal, and we almost put no money of our own. Obviously, when I say that, I mean capital infusion into the project. But
Right.
like I said, all the work prior to that moment where we raise money from our investors, we're taking on all the risk, right? So to acquire all these properties and to do all this work, it's being funded by the umbrella company, right? By the holding company. And then once it's been secured, once we have the game plan, then we get funding from our investor partners through Moon Equities. And the two value propositions is you can either join, it depends also on the product that we're giving them. So if the product has a higher risk profile, then we allow them the opportunity to come in as a joint venture partner. But if it's a low level risk, then we just give them, a fixed return on their capital. And that's the way we provide the different value propositions. The different products that we allow them to invest into are either an entry level product, similar to what I was explaining to you, or we do also luxury single family residences, and those are at the criteria for it is they have to be at the top 1% of homes within that particular market. So for example, in Nashville, that would be like a $5 million home. In LA, that would be like anywhere between 10 and $25 million home. We also X out the outliers, like, there are homes in LA that sell for like $200 million. I don't care. Like that doesn't, that's like, I don't care about, Jay-Z and Beyonce's home. I don't care about the next billionaire's home. Those are just eliminated from our calculation. So we just look at like, what's the average price of the top 1% of homes without the outlier products. And that's the second value proposition that we give them. That's a higher risk opportunity. The reason why it's higher risk is just because it takes a longer time frame. So it takes about 5 years for that product to get completed from start to finish. And then at the very top of the scale is larger commercial projects that we get into, and that's a similar risk profile to the single family residences, but in my personal opinion, with an added element of risk in particular markets, due to political and socioeconomic impacts, right? So if I were to give you an example, the tower that we're in, we're trying to redevelop to become a hotel. Is that by right? Yes. Does the community get the right to say no to it? Also, yes, right? So that leaves us in a sort of precarious position where it's allowed to do that, but the communities could also decide that they don't want it. And if they decide that they don't want it, we have to pivot, which has a higher risk profile than building like a high-end luxury home. Does that make
Mm,
sense?
yeah, totally makes sense. So have you had a lot of struggles with that type of commercial properties?
Yeah, I mean, it's just part of the process, and it even happens with single family properties. People all the time want to give their 2 cents. A lot of times, it's also not in people's favor for other properties to come up. Your competition don't want you there. Other developers don't want you there. Other landlords might not want you there. So, for example, if you're trying to build a hotel or reconvert office building to a hotel, all the other hotels are going to be upset, right? Because you're taking market share from them, and now you're going to be the new hotel. So they might complain, right? And they might be like, "Oh, well, this is not in the best interest of the community," and then they might pay other people to also complain and lobby and things like that. So there are definitely layers and ways in which you navigate all these conversations. But I'm only giving you an insight on all this stuff, not to deter you from doing it, but to tell you the reality of none of this is easy.
Yeah.
And it's doable. You just need to know what you're doing. And
Right.
also have the correct expectation of how long it's going to take before you get your money back.
Right. What's the shortest project you've done?
20 days.
20. Oh, wow. But was this like a quick flip
You asked about the quickest. I didn't say it was the fanciest. Yes, it was 20 days, and it was a small flip. We were in and out.
we're in and out? That's insane. 20 days? What was the project about?
It was one of those entry-level homes, right? They usually take about 20 days to turn them around and put them back on the market.
So it was just one property?
No, it's any one property
Okay.
in that product usually takes anywhere up to 3 months. But the shortest that we've ever done was 20 days before it was completely finished.
Okay.
Now we held it, but
Yeah.
it's
What's
20 days.
what's the demographics on your investors? What are they chasing more? Is it equity? I know everybody has their risk, but are they looking for a cash on cash return? What are they exactly? What are the motives that drive them?
So, the way that I kind of mentioned this earlier, but the way that we have our partnerships with our investors is slightly different to how the vast majority of people in real estate look at it. I think a lot of people in real estate think about it very transactionally. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you 12%. Good night. I'll see you later, right? Maybe we do that, a few times together, or forever. But there isn't this understanding of wealth management and working together as a family office where we all want to grow together, right? And that's kind of what sets us apart from a lot of other real estate investors is we almost do that, right? So the vast majority of our investors start with an entry-level product, right? Because they're looking for that cash cycle, right? They're looking to create a return. They start anywhere with 200. The smallest ticket price that we take is 50,000 for that very entry-level product. And I'm not even sure that we still take the 50,000 clip, to be honest. They may have been canceled. And the average, I'd say, is like around the $200,000 mark for that entry-level product. And that's where most people start. And then they start asking, how could they diversify their portfolio, right? And I tell them what I do personally, right? I don't tell them this is financial advice. I tell them I personally, and this is not financial advice, I personally do this, right? I have this much in the entry-level product, I have this much in the mid-level product, and I have this much in the high-end product. And then they kind of start thinking about it themselves. They speak to their financial advisors, whatever it is that they need to do, their attorneys and all that. And they come back and then they diversify their portfolio. So the vast majority of people that start with the entry-level product then eventually invest in the mid-tier product, we haven't actually had anyone from the entry level product go all the way to the very top. And I completely understand that, because the very top product, like buildings like this, I don't actually own any equity. The people that own it are the largest landlords in Los Angeles. We
Right.
come as a fee developer for them, but we have the expertise to be able to do that product and that service for them. And the reason why we don't really deploy our capital into those high-end products is because of the risk reward value proposition. While a billionaire could hold the property for the next 15 years and not expect any cash on it because they're getting a variety of different incentives from that property, neither me or my investors feel that way. So we'd rather keep our cash moving than kind of park it in something that will take quite a little bit of time. But I believe that maybe in the next 4 years, that same investor group will be able to eventually deploy some of the capital that we've made collectively into these higher end plays that we're currently doing for other people.
I see what you're saying. So you don't want to play with more than 30% of everything that you have to deposit in deals, right? Because that will be depending way too much on one deal specifically.
That's one way of looking at it, correct.
Interesting. What about that end product that you were talking about? Tell me a little more about that one.
Oh, like at the very top.
Yeah.
So at the very top is something that we're also actually trying to do ourselves right now, but at a smaller scale. But I'll give you an example. I mentioned this building, right? This building is 6100 Wilshire. 6100 Wilshire is owned by one of my good friends, and at the time we were working on a deal together, and he was my business partner on a particular project. He approached me. He said that his building isn't doing too well, right? And he asked if there's something that we could do, and he had an idea around, being able to maybe convert it into apartments or hotel, or what do we do with this, right? So we ran a few studies, highest and best use, and what we eventually found out is the highest and best use scenario for this particular building is a mix of apartments and hotel and some commercial activities like hospitality. Sorry, I mentioned hospitality, like restaurants and what was the other one? Venue spaces that could provide the highest return on investment and the highest NOI for the building. And that is that kind of play, right? So you look at the building, you look at how the building's operating, you look at the penetration analysis of adding a particular number of rooms within a particular market and how that changes the price of the room per night, and then adding a certain number of apartments to the market and how that changes the price and the valuation of the market and whether the market would be able to absorb it or not. And those are the kind of studies that we do for higher end projects that are similar to this one, because it could significantly impact the market. So hypothetically speaking, if you think about it in number of rooms, right? If currently there is 1,500 rooms on offer in Los Angeles and there is 1,200 rooms being booked a night, and then we supply another 300 rooms, then that's going to crash the price of rooms per night, right? And no one's going to be happy about that. So you want to be able to enter a market with the right diligence. And it's not just on the spreadsheet, right? The spreadsheet is part of it. And then the other operating factors and human factors come into play. This building used to be an office tower for the RBC Bank, right? Royal Bank of Canada. So it looks like a bank. It does not look like a hotel. It does not look like a luxury hotel for that, right? So if your performance or your performa demands a 600-700 a night product, then it needs to look like a 600-700 a night product, right? It needs to compete like a $600-700 a night product. And to be able to deliver that product requires a certain amount of funds, right? So to be able to get those funds in a market that is distressed, it's kind of hard. So how do you go about creating the cost saving measures to reallocate those resources to reimagine this particular building? And in this case, we looked at the building. It was a glass black tower, and this glass black tower costs about $1 million a year. It's 890 some change $1,000 a year in heating and cooling alone. I thought, wow, what if we brought that down by half? Over 30 years, that would save about $15 million. in expenses just by making it cooler, right?
Yeah.
So we created this umbrella shading device that you could take a look at on our studio website, samahastudio.com. And it basically goes between every floor plate and the next, and it shades the floor below it. Very simple structure. And that structure more than pays for itself in the cost saving measures. And then on top of that, it makes the building look soft like a hotel, because now you've reimagined what it looks like on the outside. So it looks like something that looks like, you know, something out of Miami or Dubai, when otherwise it would have looked still beautiful, just doesn't fit the bill. You can't imagine that an FBI building would be the next hottest hotel.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't, right? And that's the exact same thing.
Wow. That's and that long-term play will probably pay itself by just the calculations that you're making.
Yeah, so the building goes from, you know, operating at, I don't want to say what it's going to operate at now, but it does,
Right.
it goes up significantly. It goes up
Okay.
about 2x. So
Wow.
so it goes up quite significantly, just on a NOI basis.
Right. That's amazing. For any investors or anybody that will be wanting to hear more about your products, learn more about like what you're working on, how can they reach out to you?
So they would need to reach out to me personally. So they either follow me on my Instagram at real Amr Samaha and reach out to me directly. We're very selective with who we work with. Or they could reach out to us on our Moon Equities page,
Gotcha.
Moon Equities on Instagram or on our website, or reach out to my business partner, Anthony Nomura, on Instagram as well. Or just email us, info@moonequities.com or info@samaha.com, and we'd love to help you with your next project.
You know where to contact now. Amir, this was incredible. So much knowledge. I love it. I love it. I learned so much from talking to you. I appreciate it so much.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you for having me on.
If you guys made it this far in the video, please subscribe, hit the like button, and I'll see you guys on the next one.